In a world dominated by traditional religious structures, one movement is emerging from the shadows, not to promote evil, but to challenge the very definitions of morality, spirituality, and freedom. This is not a tale of devils and demons, but a philosophy, protest, and personal autonomy. This is the story of modern Satanism. When most people hear Satanism, images of dark rituals, pentagrams, and malevolent intent come to mind. But much of that is myth, shaped by centuries of religious propaganda and pop culture. Modern Satanism is less about worshiping a horned figure, and more about challenging authority, dogma, and the status quo. The Church of Satan, founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey, marked a turning point. It wasn't about devil worship, it was satire, philosophy, and social critique. LaVey's Satan was a symbol of rebellion, of individualism, and of pride in being different. He reimagined Satan not as a supernatural villain, but as the ultimate outsider, a figure who refused submission and embraced the raw, unapologetic nature of humanity. In the Satanic Bible, LaVey outlined a philosophy rooted in self-empowerment, indulgence without shame, and personal responsibility. It was a direct challenge to religious guilt, asceticism, and blind obedience. To LaVey and his followers, Satan represented liberation from the chains of dogma, an icon for those who dared to live authentically, even if it meant being cast out by society. This reframing was radical. It turned the moral narrative on its head. What if the so-called villain was actually the hero? What if the fall from grace wasn't a tragedy, but a triumph of free will? For those disillusioned with traditional faiths, this was more than rebellion. It was revelation. LaVey's movement attracted artists, intellectuals, and outcasts, people who felt alienated by mainstream religion and found solace in a belief system that didn't demand self-denial or shame. His rituals, though theatrical, were never about summoning demons. They were about reclaiming control, channeling emotion, and affirming one's desires as natural, not sinful. To many, Satanism became a form of spiritual rebellion, an affirmation of life's pleasures in a world that so often preached restraint. But as society evolved, so too did Satanism. In the decades that followed, new interpretations emerged, less focused on spectacle and more engaged with activism. Where LaVey's Church of Satan emphasized individualism and personal freedom, a new wave of Satanists began to see their identity as a political statement. It wasn't just about rejecting God, it was about resisting oppressive systems in all their forms, religious, governmental, cultural. And from that new current, the Satanic Temple was born. Satanism, particularly the modern, non-theistic kind, is rooted in Enlightenment values. It emphasizes rational inquiry, secularism, and personal liberty. In many ways, it mirrors aspects of existentialism and humanism, but with a dark, theatrical flair. The Satanic Temple, founded in 2013, takes these ideas a step further. They don't believe in a literal Satan. Instead, they use Satan as a literary figure, a rebel who defied tyranny and stood for knowledge and freedom. Their 7 tenets promote compassion, justice, and bodily autonomy. Ironically, they align more with progressive ethical principles than many mainstream religions today. The irony is striking. An organization invoking Satan as its emblem often champions values more in line with contemporary human rights than those preached from traditional pulpits. The Satanic Temple's advocacy isn't just philosophical, it's active, visible, and often confrontational. From fighting for reproductive rights and LGBTQ+ protections, to challenging religious displays on government property, they use legal and cultural mechanisms to defend pluralism and the separation of church and state. For its members, Satan is not a monster, but a metaphor, an enduring symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority and unjust power. By adopting this symbol, they align themselves with all who have been cast out, silenced, or condemned for thinking differently. Their darkness is not malevolent, it is the unspoken, the forbidden, the honest. In a world where conformity is often rewarded and dissent punished, Satanism offers a space where rebellion is sacred, and where asking dangerous questions is not only allowed, but encouraged. This embrace of the outsider isn't merely aesthetic, it's foundational. The Satanic Temple deliberately positions itself at the cultural fault lines where religious privilege clashes with secular governance. By insisting on equal treatment under the law, they expose the favoritism often granted to dominant religious ideologies. If a courthouse allows a nativity scene, why not a Baphomet statue? If prayer is sanctioned in schools, why not include satanic invocations? The outrage these questions provoke serves a purpose: to reveal the illusion of religious neutrality in public life. Their activism holds up a mirror to society's moral inconsistencies, and that mirror is uncomfortable to look into. It reflects a culture where religious freedom is often code for Christian dominance, and where challenging that norm is met with fear, not dialogue. Yet, it's precisely this discomfort that fuels the Satanic Temple's work. They do not seek chaos. They seek clarity. By highlighting hypocrisy, they force society to reckon with what it really believes about tolerance, inclusion, and freedom. In this way, Satanism, stripped of myth and misunderstanding, emerges not as a threat to morality, but as a challenge to its gatekeepers. It asks, who decides what is sacred? And what happens when those who've long been cast into the dark begin to celebrate it? Modern Satanists aren't trying to destroy religion, they're questioning its place in public life. Through provocative campaigns, like installing Baphomet statues next to Ten Commandments monuments or challenging abortion restrictions, Satanists highlight the importance of separation of church and state. Their actions expose a double standard. Why is Christian symbolism accepted in public institutions, but satanic imagery sparks outrage? It forces society to confront its biases and reevaluate the meaning of religious freedom. By confronting these contradictions head-on, Satanists illuminate a deeper truth, that the concept of religious freedom is often wielded selectively. When a dominant faith saturates public spaces, its presence becomes invisible, seen as neutral, traditional, even patriotic. But the moment an alternative worldview demands equal representation, the illusion of neutrality crumbles. The discomfort isn't about the satanic imagery itself, it's about being reminded that pluralism means accepting voices that disrupt the norm. In this way, satanic activism functions as a kind of cultural stress test. It pushes legal systems, schools, and government bodies to either uphold true religious equality or reveal their biases. And when they do the latter, Satanists are there, not with violence or chaos, but with paperwork, lawsuits, and carefully structured arguments. Their power doesn't lie in belief, it lies in strategy. To many, this approach is not just subversive, it's brilliant. By adopting the language and structure of religion while rejecting supernaturalism, Satanists use the very rules designed to protect religion to question its dominance. In doing so, they don't seek to replace belief with blasphemy, they seek to ensure that no single belief system holds sway over everyone else. This calculated use of the system reveals a profound paradox. The more Satanists insist on equal treatment, the more they expose how unequal the playing field truly is. Their presence in public discourse doesn't erode religious freedom, it puts it to the test. And in doing so, they compel lawmakers, educators, and communities to confront the uncomfortable question, is freedom of religion truly universal, or is it only upheld when it aligns with the majority's comfort? That's the genius and the threat of modern Satanism. It doesn't demand conversion. It doesn't ask for worship. It demands consistency. It forces society to live up to the ideals it so often claims to hold dear: fairness, neutrality, and the protection of minority voices. Where other religious groups seek privilege, Satanists seek parity. This distinction is critical. They're not trying to take religion out of public life, they're revealing how deeply one religion is already embedded within it. And by doing so, they shift the debate away from abstract theology and towards civil rights. The question is no longer what do you believe, but rather, who gets to be heard? Through this lens, Satanism becomes less about shock and more about accountability. It is a form of cultural resistance, an insistence that symbolism, like belief, is not the property of the few. Satanic rituals are often misunderstood. Rather than acts of harm or darkness, they're symbolic performances, celebrations of personal empowerment, catharsis, and community. The inverted cross, the pentagram, the image of Baphomet, these are not calls to evil, but statements of opposition to oppressive systems. To Satanists, darkness is not malevolence, it's the unknown, the hidden, the unspoken. And celebrating it means embracing truth, no matter how uncomfortable. These symbols, long demonized by religious tradition, are recontextualized by Satanists as tools of liberation. The rituals they perform are not about summoning otherworldly powers, but about confronting inner ones, fears, traumas, desires, doubts. In a world that often demands silence and conformity, these rituals become acts of radical honesty. They give form to things that are usually hidden, offering participants a way to process, to express, and to reclaim parts of themselves that society has taught them to suppress. Community plays a central role in these gatherings. While many imagine Satanists as loners or nihilists, the reality is far more human. These rituals often bring people together not in darkness, but in solidarity. They create sacred space not to worship a deity, but to affirm a shared commitment to autonomy, to justice, and to truth. In this way, the ritual becomes a rejection of shame and a celebration of self. And in embracing the darkness, symbolically, emotionally, spiritually, Satanists aren't choosing evil. They're choosing honesty. They're saying that life is not always light, that meaning can be found in shadow, and that freedom sometimes begins where tradition ends. In fact, for many modern Satanists, the act of ritual itself is a kind of secular spirituality, an intentional moment carved out of ordinary life to confront the complexities of being human. It is where philosophy meets performance, where symbolism becomes a vessel for transformation. The darkness they celebrate is not the darkness of cruelty or chaos, but the darkness of the unknown, the parts of the self and of society that polite conversation avoids. By reclaiming these symbols and rituals, Satanists take power back from narratives that have long vilified them. They flip the script, turning tools of fear into emblems of strength. A pentagram is not a curse, but a compass. An inverted cross is not an insult, but a critique. The image of Baphomet, with its balance of opposites, male and female, human and beast, light and dark, becomes a symbol of harmony, not horror. In these expressions, Satanism becomes a language for those who felt silenced. It becomes a home for those exiled by religion, by culture, or by identity. It is not chaos, it is clarity. Not destruction, but deconstruction. And in its rituals, there is a kind of alchemy, fear transformed into empowerment, shame into pride, and silence into voice. Of course, not everyone agrees. Critics argue that Satanism is inflammatory, even dangerous. But Satanists counter, is it dangerous to ask questions? To challenge authority? To demand equal rights? Many see the outrage as proof of their point. If religious freedom is truly a universal right, then it must include voices that make us uncomfortable, voices that question power. And that discomfort, Satanists argue, is not a flaw in the system, it's a symptom of its imbalance. When a symbol or idea provokes outrage simply because it challenges the status quo, it reveals the fragility of that status. If society can tolerate only certain types of faith, only familiar forms of morality, then its commitment to freedom is selective, not principled. To question dominant narratives has always been risky, whether in politics, religion, or culture. But Satanism embraces that risk. It leans into it. Not out of malice, but because growth often begins in discomfort. Progress begins with a challenge. And the voices that provoke us are often the ones that force us to think more critically, to define our values more clearly, and to recognize the biases we didn't know we had. In this sense, Satanism doesn't undermine religious freedom, it stress tests it. It asks, can you defend the rights of someone you disagree with? Someone who offends you? Someone whose values upend your own? Because if not, then those rights are conditional, and conditional freedom is no freedom at all. This is where Satanism becomes more than just a belief system, it becomes a mirror. It reflects not only how society treats dissent but how it defines virtue. If compassion, justice, and autonomy are seen as dangerous when presented through a satanic lens, then the issue isn't the values, it's the packaging. And that, Satanists say, reveals a deeper truth, that morality is often judged not by action, but by affiliation. The challenge Satanism presents is not to faith itself, but to hypocrisy. It asks why kindness from a priest is praised, but kindness from a Satanist is suspect. It asks why a symbol of rebellion is feared more than the systems it rebels against. And most importantly, it asks why we are so quick to conflate symbolism with substance, image with intent. For Satanists, the outcry they provoke is not a failure, it's evidence that their work is necessary. Because until freedom of religion includes the fringe, the feared, and the misunderstood, it isn't freedom at all. It's conformity with a halo. And to them, that's far more dangerous than anything Satan ever represented. Satanism is not about chaos, it's about contrast. It's a mirror held up to society, reflecting its fears, hypocrisies, and unexamined beliefs. In celebrating darkness, Satanists remind us, there is power in the shadow. Not to destroy, but to illuminate what's been hidden. In a world that often silences dissent, Satanism asks us to reconsider who gets to define good and evil, and whether darkness, in all its complexity, deserves to be feared or understood.